Letting people in.
I didn't know y'all had snacks.
Leah, we're ready when you are.
Awesome, thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Leah LaRue, and I'm the Director of Neighborhood Planning Units for the City of Atlanta in the Department of City Planning. I am very happy to be joined tonight by some of my colleagues. I'm going to ask everybody to go ahead and mute your microphone, if you will, please, or I'll ask staff to please be quick to mute any wayward mics. Thank you so much. I'm joined tonight by Ide Santana, who is our Program Development Manager. Say hi, Ide.
Maybe if I can find the unmute.
I was going to say, you can't find the unmute
before. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I hope you're excited to join this class and hear this content today about the legislative process.
And Tony McNeil, who's our Program Coordinator Senior for Outreach and Engagement.
Good evening, everyone. Glad to be here.
And last but not least, Samantha Terry, Program Coordinator Senior for Education and Training, and she's our NPU University Registrar. If you don't know any of the rest of us, you probably know Samantha.
Hey, everybody. I'm glad you're here tonight.
All right, so thank you all again for being here. This is our CP1001, the legislative process. If you're tracking your courses, you'll find that information to be relevant. If not, you can skip that part. But welcome to the legislative process. This is a really, really informative class. We do always send out the PowerPoint presentations at the end of the class, so you'll get that. And if you see someone asking in the chat if they can have the presentation afterward, you'll know that they were either late to class or they were ignoring me when I was talking, one of the two. It never fails. In every class, there's someone that asks. But you will get a copy of the presentation when it's over, but I wanted to make sure you know that this is a lot of information. Some of our classes, if you take other classes of ours, some of them are a little, I don't know, they're all different. Every class is different, but this one has a lot of information. So it's a good time to grab a pen, pencil, paper, notebook, whatever. If you like to take notes, you may want to do that. Please do make sure that you keep your microphone muted at all times. And if you are taking this course to receive credit for our CPC program or for any other reason, please make sure that you keep your camera turned on. If you'd like to ask a question during the Q&A, please raise your hand to get in the queue, and I'll show you in just a moment how to do that. And of course, all questions must be relevant to course content. So to raise your hand, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a button that says reactions. If you click on that button, you'll get a pop-up box. And at the bottom of that pop-up box is a button that says raise hand. You can click on that to raise your hand. If you're out of practice or you just want to make sure it works, you can go ahead and do that, and we'll ignore the raised hand just this one time. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague and one of my favorite people on the second floor, Jared Evans, who is a legislative research and policy analyst for the Atlanta City Council. Jared is also a registered parliamentarian, but he's not wearing that hat tonight. He is here to teach us a little bit about the legislative process. Many of you, those of you who are active in the NPU system or in the neighborhood association, in your neighborhood association, you probably know that all of your recommendations go to the city of Atlanta in some way. What you may not know is what that process looks like on the back end or on our end, on the city's end, and how legislation is created. You'll learn how legislation is created. You'll learn the structure of the Atlanta City Council and all of their committees, et cetera. I won't get ahead of Jared. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and pass the microphone and the sharing capabilities to Jared Evans.
Thank you, Leah. Yeah, don't overpromise.
No, don't underdeliver.
Have I shared the screen correctly? Can people see?
Yes,
Okay,
we can see it.
but thank you for warning them. This individual legislation can be exciting and interesting, but the process can be dry and it can be a boring topic. So everybody hang in there with me. So yeah, I'm going to try to share a little bit about the process, shed some light on it. Hopefully you'll leave the class with better understanding of the legislative process that shapes our city. Leah told you a little bit about me. I've been a policy analyst with the city for 5 years now. My background has been in this line of work. So I've prior to working for the city council, I was with the state senate as a program budget analyst. I've got a degree in political science, an MBA, an MPA, registered parliamentarian, as mentioned, and some project management certifications. And all of these things are helpful in trying to wrap my head around the legislative process because it's complicated here and everywhere. Additionally, I'm a regular attendee of my NPUS meetings. Everyone should be. They're really informative and keep you up to date on what's happening in your area. And I'm an active member of the Rotary Club of Atlanta West End. There are a few specific points in the slide presentation where I'll check in with you to see if you're still awake and if you have any questions about what we just talked about. I'll answer 1 or 2 questions maybe, but try to keep it moving so that we can get through all the important information, and then there'll be a longer Q&A at the end of the slide presentation. So let's get into this. Let's talk a moment about the city council. Just like you learned in school, there's the 3 branches of government, legislative, executive, and judicial. In the city of Atlanta, the city council is the executive or the legislative branch. The various departments under the direction of the mayor constitute the executive branch, and the municipal courts are the judicial branch. The city council is the chief policy-making body for the city of Atlanta. And as the legislative body, the council's main role is to make laws. In addition, the council provides oversight to the city departments and various boards and commissions. The Atlanta City Council has 15 members and is led by the council president. When you're thinking about your interactions, your advocacy will be most effective when it's directed toward the elected officials that represent you and your neighborhood. I'll tell you a little bit about the different sorts of representation that are available to you here on the council. The city council president is elected citywide. He presides over all the meetings of the full council and votes in the case of a tie, the simplest way to put that. The council president appoints the committee chairs and assigns the council members to the 7 standing committees of the council. There are 7 different committees. And the council president would exercise all powers and discharge all the duties of the mayor in the event that the mayor was unable to do so. So there's 15 council members, and 12 of them are elected from single member districts. So wherever you live in the city of Atlanta, you've got a district council member that represents you. Then there are 3 members elected at large, the post 1, post 2, post 3 at large, and they're paired with council district groupings. So the post 1 at large member is paired with districts 1, 2, 3, and 4. Post 2 at large is paired with 5 through 8, and post 3 at large 9 through 12. And each of these offices has does a lot of what they do is constituent services. The council members make every effort to be responsible to the citizens of their district because these are their constituents. The council president, the at-large council members, the district council members, and they have a different constituency and they're responsive to them in different ways. Just the council district you think about has a more narrow set of interests. They're thinking about the people who live in the boundaries of their council district, while the post at-large members have a little more of the swath of the city to think about, and the council president citywide. Each of these council offices for these elected council members have their own staff that address council constituent questions. So they're a good resource to you, and they're there to reach out and be responsive to you. So if you have something that's an issue that you're concerned about, I mean, I would want to know who your council district representative is, who your post at large district member is, or your council member is, and then you may even want to reach out to the council president's office. I'm a part of the professional staff that assists all the council members by focusing on assigned committees of the council with more narrow policy domains or areas of purview. So I don't serve any one particular member, but rather the whole council. And then just to wrap this up, they're elected to 4-year terms. The current city council began its term January 2022. Next elections happen for everyone you see pictured in front of you is going to be November 2025. But there's going to be a special election for that vacant seat. The post 3 at large seat is vacant currently, and that election is going to happen this November. So November 2024. Talking a little bit about the context in which the city council exists and what constrains it and what dictates how it should conduct itself. The proceedings of the council are governed by parliamentary procedures, and this is kind of in hierarchical order. If you think about the bottom of this is going to be the parliamentary procedures, just a book on how meetings ought to be run, called Robert's Rules of Order. Next, there's the rules of the council, and the council has some more specific rules that it operates by that would overrule parliamentary procedure. And then so forth. The council rules can't be out of line with the local ordinances, the city ordinances. And then there's our city charter, which is like our constitution, and then state law and federal law. If this were like rock, paper, scissors, federal beats state, beats the local government, beats the rules of council. Let's talk about the types of legislation. And there are some colloquialisms that you'll hear when you're talking to people around the city. They'll say the word papers, and papers are just, it's legislation of any type that appears on an agenda. And you'll hear the term reads, or a read, a first read, a second read. That's a read is an appearance of legislation on an agenda. And a key important thing is that it's the full council agenda appearance that really truly counts as a read. Ordinances, the top of the list there. Ordinances require 2 reads. Charter amendments, which are a type of ordinance, are enacted through ordinance. They get 3 reads. Resolutions get 1 read. Communications, I'll explain a little bit about, but they're letters and memos conveying information such as nominations to boards, authorities, commissions, and cabinet level positions. And then the last thing on the list, there are claims. This is really the only mention of claims in this presentation, so I'll tell you a little bit more. Sometimes people file claims alleging injury or property damage caused by the city, and they seek compensation. And so all claims are routed to the Public Safety Legal Administration Committee, where they're handled in that committee. So going into the different types of legislation, an ordinance is a law or regulation enacted by local government. It has the force of law within the jurisdiction and is used to regulate public behavior, enforce standards, or manage local affairs. Because of the importance of an ordinance, it must be an agenda item twice, getting 2 reads. This provides more time and opportunity for discussion and consideration. 2 reads is going to be over the course of 2 legislative cycles, and that's going to be generally 4 weeks if there are no holidays or council recesses. Legislative cycles include a full council meeting and a committee, like full council week and then committee week. And these 2-week cycles run on a perpetual loop. And I'll show you a schedule in a little bit that can help you visualize this. And then, like I mentioned, because of the gravity of an amendment to the city charter, it's got to be read 3 times. The charter is like our Constitution, and the charter is granted to us by the state of Georgia. Resolutions are a formal statement or a decision made by the governing body to express an opinion, to take action on a specific matter, maybe to handle procedural issues. It does not have the force of law and is typically used for internal matters and or making public statements. Resolutions carry less weight than an ordinance or certainly a charter amendment, so these can be acted on with just 1 reading. And they can even be acted on immediately in some cases. So they could be voted on in the same meeting in which they were first introduced. Communications, they're a category of official actions listed on the city council agendas. The actions usually include appointing individuals to boards and commissions. They can be accepting reports or studies, and appointing members of the cabinet. So each piece of legislation is going to be given a legislative ID. It's going to help you to identify it. And when you're talking to people about it, when you're talking to staff, when you're talking to council members, it's super helpful so that everyone knows exactly which piece of legislation we're talking about. So each piece is assigned a unique identifier. The ID has 3 parts, and each will tell you valuable information. Really always be aware of this when you're discussing legislation, and if you can use that, you're going to save everybody a lot of time. And so the first part is going to be the year it was introduced. The second part, the R in this case, will tell you it's a resolution. It'd be an O if it were an ordinance. If it were communication, you see a C. There are proclamations too, and they get their assigned numbers and they get a P. And then there's a numeric system for each of those. But 3001 would have been like the first resolution of 2024. Are there any, can I pause and catch any questions at this stage? Is anyone? Let me see if I can see hands.
I don't,
We good?
yeah, I think we're good. I want to know,
Okay.
Mr. Martin. Go ahead, Mr. Martin.
Yeah, I'm curious as to what the significance of a resolution is. It seems like quite often resolutions from council are calling on others to do things that the others then simply ignore.
That can happen. I mean, that's just a statement of the council's position or the city's position on something. But, when they urge the General Assembly of the state of Georgia to vote one way or another, there's nothing they can do to make that happen. But it lets everyone know where they stand. Sometimes resolutions, give the blessing of the council for a city department to apply for a grant or something. And it's written in the code that they need to get permission from the governing body before they do something like that. So that's an example of why it's not a law or anything, but you do need to get that blessing of the governing body.
Ms. Adams?
Thank you, Sam. My question is related to the charter. You
Mhm.
said that it requires 3 reads, and then I heard you explain the legislative cycle, and I was thinking that that was something incredibly long. I had no idea it was just from meeting to meeting, and I wanted to make sure I understood that correctly.
Yeah, a cycle is 2 weeks, basically.
Okay,
And I'm going to
Thank
show you an internal planning calendar we use that'll may help with that a little bit. I think it might be next. Okay, let's and then here's something just to think about as you read a piece of legislation or see one. You want to think about what is it saying? What is it solving? What's the impact going to be? Is it an existing change to existing policies? Is it something totally new? Costs are always something worth considering. How much from where? And a lot of times in the legislation, there'll be references to our own city code or the state of Georgia's annotated code. And that'll be the shorthand. They won't go into all the details of what that says, but every now and then it's worth going to take a look to see what this is referencing, and then you can learn a little bit more about the intent. This is a little bit of the legislative flow presented one way. I think I'm going to show this to you a couple ways. So things began happening behind the scenes before a piece of legislation debuts, weeks in advance. Starting at the top of this, in one way legislation begins is for city departments to begin drafting legislation that then they're going to send over to the mayor's office and through the law department and through procurement if needed, and to get a series of approvals. Once it goes to the mayor's office for final approval law, it's going to come to the office that I work for, where we'll then review it and place it on an agenda of one of the 7 standing committees. These would be committee papers. Another way for legislation to enter into the process is for council members to introduce it as a personal paper, because they also have their own initiatives. At the end of every council meeting, it's when council members introduce their legislation. If you've ever watched all the way through one of those, these are then assigned to the appropriate committees by the council president. Committees are where everything, all the work should happen on legislation. This is where it's publicly voted on. There will be amendments if necessary. And then these committees that are meant to be thinking deeply about specific policy areas make their recommendation to the larger council. And they'll send it to the council, stamped with their recommendation to either approve it, to adverse it, or to file it. And the council then will take that under consideration at the next meeting to see what it wants to do. In the example, or in the instance where it is adopted, that legislation is then presented to the mayor's office within 2 days. Mayor has 8 days to act on it, or via signature, or to veto it, and then he can send it back. Or if he takes no action, then it's just going to become law. My office reviews all of the legislation that goes through the council, and just some highlights of what that looks like for FY24. That's the year we're wrapping up. Our office processed 27 research requests. We drafted 371 pieces of legislation. We analyzed 1,454 pieces of legislation, and we staffed approximately 237 hours of committee meetings. And then a little bit more about what the common actions are on legislation. They can approve or adopt. That's a vote to pass the legislation, thereby giving it official endorsement and making it effective. One distinction, committees approve, the council adopts. So committees make their recommendations to the full council as to what they think should happen. You know, I think we approve this and we think the council ought to adopt it. It's the council that has the final say so. Legislation can be amended, and a lot of times you'll hear the word substitute. The committee or the council can propose changes to the legislation either by modifying specific provisions or substituting large swaths of the text or the entire text to an alternative version. So a substitute is really just a type of amendment, and you'll hear both terms a lot if you pay attention to the city council. Hold is an option. The council or a committee delays the decision on the legislation. This is typically to gather more information or to address concerns, to allow further discussion or negotiation. A lot of that will happen in the weeks in between meetings. Held legislation does have an expiration date, 1 year from the date that it's held in committee, or the last meeting before a new council is sworn in. So, you know, basically every 4 years. At that December meeting, any held items that haven't been acted on before the new council members are sworn in January would just, I think, automatically filed is the terminology we use. And then file. When we file legislation, the council is deciding to take no further action on the legislation at the current time. The action prevents the legislation from moving forward in its current form. The concept may be reintroduced at a later date in a subsequent legislative vehicle, but the legislation under that legislative ID, that concept is just filed away. That's not the same as adverse. Adverse is when the council votes against the legislation and they reject it. So adverse is an expression of disapproval, whereas file really has no value judgment attached to it. Is there any questions there that we should address before moving on? I don't see.
Martin?
Okay.
Yes, we see ordinances that waive the strictures of other ordinances that are on the books. Is there any limit to council's ability to do that? Can anything be waived in a specific instance that's already on the books?
Well, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to say yes for sure, but it seems that, you know, many provisions of the code can be waived. You know, these were enacted by the council and they can be waived by the council, and often it'll say, you know, for this specific instance. All right. So here's a look at a planning document that we use. And it's not, this is last year's, but it's normally what I want to show you here is an illustration of the cycles and the flow of the checkpoints. So this is an overview. There's 21 cycles in the year. You know, January to January. Let's zoom in here at this top line. So to give you a sense, if the administration is planning a piece of legislation that they would like to have passed at the January 8th meeting, that they would have begun to think about it back in October. And they would have you know, done a legislative request that was due to the law department. If it was procurement related, it's going to get a procurement check. And so it's going back and forth here. At some point, the executive office will sign off on it, and then it's sent over to the Office of Research and Policy, where I work, at the beginning of December. And this is all so that it can be on the agendas of the committee meetings that happen December 11 to 13. And then after a long Christmas break, or there would be January 8th is when this legislation, assuming it was found favorable and moved out to the full council, would end up here. So this is just to show you the stages and layers of approval that happen, particularly with committee papers, which I'll discuss in a second. I guess I should mention that the city council, if you don't know this already, meets on the first and the third week of the month. And the committee meetings are on the second and fourth week of the month. So first and third for full council, second and fourth for committee meetings. So let's talk a little bit about, this is a visual representation that I made today. So I think if we interrogate this for too long, too enthusiastically, we may find ways in which this doesn't work, but I believe this is going to apply to probably 90% of legislation. So if we look on the left side here, these are what I would call the initiators, where the legislation is going to be initiated by the mayor, the administration, by council members, or by various appointing authorities in the instance of boards, authorities, and commissions that are being populated. Over here in this column here, this is the types of papers. Personal papers, committee papers. Personal papers can be resolutions or ordinances, committee papers, resolutions or ordinances, and the communications, we talked about it a second ago. And you got full council meetings, committee meetings. Remember I said there were 7 committee meetings, so this block represents really all 7 committees. And then over here on the right-hand side is the outputs. So let's take an example of a communication appointing someone. So the appointing authority is going to draft up an official memo called a communication. It's going to be introduced at a full council meeting. There's a section on the full council agenda called communications. The staff is going to recommend that the appointment to this particular board, authority, or commission is the purview of one of the appropriate committees. The council president is going to say, let it follow that course, and it'll go to the appropriate committees the next week. During that week, appropriate committees will weigh in on it. They will then, vote to approve or not. Let's say they vote to approve. The following week, it's going to be at the full council again, where in this instance, the full council will approve it, and it's going to come out adopted. Important thing to note is that there's several ways into this process. There's really only this way out. It's through the full council, and it's basically one of these actions. It's going to be adopted, it's going to be adversed, or it's going to be filed. Count all of these initiators. It's never just one person. There's usually collaboration. There's a lot of efforts to gather information. Who knows where the ideas are generated, and they're going to work all together to feed into this. In the example of an administration paper, it would be a committee paper, but remember, if we go back, it would have started weeks before it actually gets introduced. It takes its final form after all those approvals, and it goes to a committee. Let's pretend it's a resolution. It's going to be on a committee agenda. That committee is going to make a recommendation on that resolution. The following full council meeting, it goes on to that agenda. The council then weighs in, and it's adopted. If it were a ordinance, let's say, coming from the administration, would have gone through all those checks and approvals, ends up on a committee agenda. It's an ordinance, so it's going to need 2 reads. It'll be sounded in at the committee. You'll hear it. It's going to be on the agenda. But remember, first reads really only account, it's the full council agenda that's the first read. So it goes to the full council, and then it gets sent right back to the committee again. Now it's a second read, and the committee can take action on it. The committee approves it recommends that the council, adopt it. The council, it gets it at its next meeting, they weigh in and adopt it, or they could file it. But the only exit's through the council, and it's one of these options here. Let me pause there in case if there's any questions about that.
Kenneth Dandy?
Yes, about filed once more. Could you talk about that once again? Yeah, adopted is approved, adverse is not approved. Filed, I think you said it had no value or something like that. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more once is in this context here?
Sure. When things are filed, they're done away with. I mean, it's not going to be implemented, and it's not going to be discussed anymore. It's just it's a thanks but no thanks to this idea.
So it just disappears?
I mean, it's filed and that it's, there's a permanent record of it. But it's not going to be implemented in any way. That whatever proposal it was will not be implemented. But it's different than if it's adverse. If it were adverse, that would be the council saying, not only is this going nowhere, but we don't like this idea. And so it's a stronger statement to adverse something than it is to file something. Sometimes things are filed just because they're not ready. The idea is not fully cooked. It doesn't necessarily mean they're not filing it necessarily because it's a bad idea. It's just that not at this time, it's not ready.
But it could come back revised, I guess, as rewritten or something like that.
Yeah,
brought back through, right?
Yeah, you just have to. Someone would have to reintroduce it.
Mhm.
It'd have to come from the administration, or a council member would write up new legislation. It would be assigned a new legislative ID and work its way back through the process again.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. I had this circular swirl here just because I want to indicate that there are times when a piece of legislation can get a recommendation from a committee. Remember, there are 7 committees. There are 7 council members on each committee. The 7 council members on a committee may make a recommendation. It goes out to the full council. One of the other members may have an issue or raise an interesting question, and there won't be an immediate answer to it. And so they'll say, let's refer it back to the committee so that these questions can be answered. So you can have an interplay between just because it leaves a committee once doesn't mean it's out and finished until it's adopted, adversed, or filed. The council can send it back to the committees.
Jared,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Mr. Martin has had his hand up too. I didn't want to.
Okay.
Yeah, we seem to have some laws on the books that the powers that be don't believe would survive legal challenge, and we preserve them by not enforcing them. And so I guess my question is twofold. One, do these represent a failure at the analysis phase of the ordinances that enacted these laws? And the other is, how could the public good possibly be served by preserving these sort of zombie ordinances on the books and not enforcing?
Well, I don't know to which ordinances you're referring.
The short-term rental ordinance would be one example.
Well, yeah, it's not, I mean, a zombie isn't the word I would use for it, but
Okay.
There's a moratorium in place on enforcing it while they collect more input and work on new language so that they can amend it. And I couldn't speak to all the reasons that went into the draft that ultimately was adopted and whether it was ready at that time. Some policymakers did, but there was public input that suggested that it wasn't ready, and there was, and in that case, the government was responsive as in one way to handle that was to just pause implementation of those rules while they get more input. So yeah, I guess ideally you might want all that to happen before you pass a piece of legislation, but it's a give and take I mean, so I mean, I appreciate the responsiveness of pressing pause if the things aren't right. And I wouldn't make a judgment about whether there's a better way to do it or not. So we'll talk a little bit about the different committees. There are 7, like I mentioned. The standing committees of the city council meet to consider legislation and make recommendations about what the full council ought to do with it. The committees have purview over different subject matter areas. As part of the oversight function of the city council, the city departments provide regular reports to the standing committee on their activities through quarterly updates. Sometimes other reporting agencies report annually, but there's some regular cadence that the organizations for which the city has oversight will provide updates to the council. The council president is the one that assigns the council members to new committees. Often there's movement each year, although I don't think that's necessarily a rule. There's public comment. There's an opportunity for that in every committee meeting. The city council feels strongly about public comment. So this is where citizens get their opportunity to speak publicly in each meeting and express their views on any piece of legislation or relevant issues to the business that is in the purview of that committee. That's the ideal use of public comment. So a little bit more diving into the jurisdiction of the committees. A lot of the names are pretty self-explanatory, so I'll breeze through this. The zoning committee reviews and recommends decisions on land use, zoning, development issues, considers proposals and advises the council on zoning changes and special permits. Typically, the neighborhood planning units and the zoning review board and the city planning department all review these matters first and provide recommendations to the zoning committee for its decision-making process. The Committee on Public Safety and Legal Administration oversees public safety, as you might guess. So police, fire, corrections, emergency management, licenses under the city's police powers, municipal court operations, solicitors, public defenders, court officers, law department, and any budgeted contracts related to these agencies. Community Development and Human Services Committee oversees city planning, economic development, building code enforcement, parks and rec, grants and community development, capital improvement programs, Atlanta Housing Authority, the newly formed Department of Labor and Employment Services, reports to CDHS, Invest Atlanta, Atlanta Beltline Inc., and any budgeted contracts related to those. The city utilities is primarily going to have things to do with the Department of Watershed Management and Department of Public Works. So this is all your solid waste, sanitation, recycling, but also cable television, city franchise agreements, and the Office of Resilience. Transportation is not that old of a, the department's not that old. It was formed under Mayor Dickens, I think as Mayor Dickens was about to take office when he was leaving the council. But the Transportation Committee oversees the airport, MARTA, the Atlanta Regional Commission, somewhat the infrastructure bonds, Atlanta Beltline, the transit portion, of course, Department of Transportation. And then the Committee on Council is this more nebulous, or at least not as obvious, perhaps to the outside viewer, but it's responsible for overseeing organization and operation of the council itself. So this includes in developing council rules and procedures, overseeing the council staff and the facilities that the council uses, and it investigates complaints about any council members. Committee has the authority to recommend disciplinary action if necessary. And lastly, finance exec handles everything related to city's finances, personnel, technology, all the administrative functions, and oversees the budget, which we are just wrapping up. It basically, the task is just to ensure that city resources are used efficiently. Can I answer any questions about committees if there are any? But if not, we'll keep moving. Because then we're going to get, I think this is useful information coming up here. So I wish I could walk you through an agenda for both the committees and the full council. But they're big. I mean, there are 50 pages for some committee agendas and then 100 pages for a full council agenda. But I've highlighted what I think are really important ones for the committee agendas. So citizen input at the meetings is important. It really is. It's and it's arguably more important at the committee meetings than the full council. So, I mean, why would I say that? Committees are where the work of perfecting the legislation is done. I alluded to this earlier. There's more time to talk in public comment in a committee. Generally speaking, I think all the committees are doing 3 minutes now versus 2 minutes at a full council meeting. So you'll have 3 minutes. The committees are where a lot of the deliberation and thought is put into this. There's no limit on the time of debate in a committee meeting. So if you can be effective in your public comments, I mean, there's a chance you influence the committee recommendation. A committee could vote to hold for further discussion, and then you'll get another cycle to lobby your council members about what your preferred outcome is for a particular piece of legislation. If one of the council members of that committee were to vote no on it, but everyone else voted yes and it passed, rather than go into the consent agenda of the full council agenda, which I'll show you in just a sec, it's going to be on the report of that standing committee. And then that means it's going to be talked about again in full council at greater length. So there'll be more opportunity for debate and discussion, more opportunity for you to try to be persuasive with your elected officials. Same thing if a council member on a committee abstains on a vote in committee, that item is going to go on the full council report rather than go into the consent agenda. So there will be, that's going to guarantee there's going to be another opportunity for discussion in the full council meeting, given you know, which is important if you want to have it discussed further. Then, when you're looking at a committee agenda, you're going to see a lot of things. There's going to be a lot of legislation on it, but the things that are really guaranteed to get votes are happening in the ordinances for second reading. So that's a good section to pay attention to. You may see an ordinance for first reading and it'll be there, but that committee is not going to vote on that item. So it's not as pressing a matter as ordinances for second reading. You may see dual referred items on there. They won't necessarily get a vote. It depends on if they've gotten through the first committee that they were assigned to, and papers that are held in the committee. There'll be a long list of papers held. Just because they're on the agenda doesn't mean they're going to be taken up that day. That they're just going to be published and shown to you on the agenda to let you know where they're at, but it doesn't mean they're ready in the process. It's ordinances for second reading is where all the action is guaranteed to happen. They're going to have to make a recommendation on an ordinance for second reading, and that recommendation might be to hold it, but otherwise they're going to take it. They're going to take a vote on it. These are all the sections of a full council agenda. And I've highlighted the ones I think are important for you guys. Public remarks, again, you're going to get 2 minutes to talk, which is, valuable time. Use it. You can say a lot in 2 minutes if you craft it well. The consent agenda, everything that went through the committees the previous week that got unanimous, votes, everyone that, all council members present and voting voted yes on, they're going to go to the consent agenda. Consent agenda has two sections. The first one contains all those items that got unanimous approval. And then in a single motion, all of these items on the consent agenda, section 1, and without any separate discussion, unless a council member calls for it, all in one vote, those items are going to be approved because they came recommended favorably from their committees. And so in one block, they'll do maybe 100 pieces of legislation. So consent agenda section 2, that's where all of the first read items from the committee agendas go to. So each item was sort of introduced at the last committee meeting. They end up on a consent agenda section 2, and in one collective vote and without any separate discussion, those items will be referred to their committees of purview and end up as second reads on the next agenda. So, and like I said before, I'll say again, completing that step is what satisfies that first read requirement. Report of the standing committees. Every item that was at the committee and was a second read or a resolution and got a vote, but had a no vote, and let's say it was 5 yeses and 1 no, that's going to be on the standing committee report to be discussed. If they got an abstention in committee, it's going to be on the standing committee report for discussion. If the committee recommended for the legislation to be filed, it's going to show up on the standing committee report. And at that point, it's going to get a vote on by the whole council, but it just will have been discussed and been an opportunity for it to be highlighted again, rather than being the full vote of like buried in a 800, not 800, 100 or so that were unanimous in committee. Then personal papers, as I mentioned a couple times, that's where the council members are going to introduce their own legislation. Sometimes say it's a resolution, it could be an item for immediate consideration. And then otherwise they're going to be referred to the committees for further perfection by the committees. Any questions there? About agendas?
Mr. Martin?
My question is about public comment, which we're speaking about, I think, on the previous slide. The zoning committee seems to be insulated from public comment on specific zoning matters by the existence of the ZRB. And I was curious to know whether that practice is codified somewhere and whether there is any other circumstance under which public comment is similarly restricted.
I don't know. I couldn't refer you to a specific code section, but you're right. The zoning comments in the zoning committee it prevents anything that had gone to the ZRB from really receiving public comment in the committee. And that's every item in the ZRB is getting a public hearing. And that's where they're trying to corral all the public comment. I don't think that applies to any other committees or any other papers. And I couldn't, like I said, I'm not sure about a code section to refer you to where that rule comes from.
Ms. Stout?
Yeah, you mentioned something about items for immediate consideration. Could you expand on that? And that means that doesn't go to committee, it doesn't have any public notification or public comment, or how does that work? What kind of items would be handled that way?
So a resolution, just needs the one read. When council members read their papers, that is the first reading for them. So that resolution would have satisfied the first reading requirement. And then right. The one thing differently, if it's going to be an immediate consideration piece of legislation, the council member will read the entire thing. They don't just read the caption, that informational paragraph at the beginning of all legislation. And it's not going to get referred to committee. And some council members will often object when things are going to be considered for immediate consideration because they think it ought to go through the committee process so things can be deliberated and carefully considered. Most of the time when things are for immediate consideration, it's messaging legislation. Something may have horrible have just happened in the world, and it'll be a resolution in support of the victims of that horrible thing, or condemning the people who perpetrated a horrible act, or in a rare instance, I guess there could just be some contract about to expire, and they would want to make sure that we don't lose the services covered by that contract. But I would say 9 times out of 10, it's some sort of messaging act in response to a world event, or sometimes the legislative sessions maybe something would have happened there that would, they don't want to wait 2 weeks to respond to, and they want to send that message now. But there's a push and pull about the value of immediate consideration, and whether or not it would be better served if it goes through the full legislative process so that ideas can be more fully interrogated and explored. But a lot of times it's messaging that everyone can get behind. Okay. Now, you may already know all this because if you're attending this class, you're pretty active, but you can follow the actions of the city council through their social media. Whatever it is, their handle is going to be ATL Council. You can also, Channel 26 is a valuable resource. If you're in the city and have cable, Channel 26 is just showing what the city is doing 24 hours a day, I think. And if you don't have cable, and if you're just streaming, you can find Channel 26 live streamed. All of our meetings are definitely live streamed. Most of our public hearings are going to be live streamed. I can't think of a public hearing that wouldn't receive Channel 26 coverage also. What I've said, and you're going to get these slides, which is great. So what I'll have done here, I'm not going to talk about all this, is I've given you active links to where you can see a lot of important information for you. The city council website you should get familiar with. It's a government website, so they're not all user friendly and glamorous, but there's tons of information here if you will get yourself acquainted with it. This is a link to where you can find the annual performance reports of the city council. There's valuable info in there, and a pretty good explanation of the legislative process is in the first few pages of that. You can find all of the council meeting agendas at this link that I'm giving you here. All of our scheduled meetings for the year are posted, which council members are on which committees, more information about the jurisdiction of the standing committees, the municipal clerk, my office, the cities, like the more for the administration side of things, their website. You should get familiar with Fulton County because they affect a lot of what's happening. Same thing with DeKalb County. Municode, this is where you can find all of the whole city charter and our code of ordinances as they currently exist is out there. And we exist within the state of Georgia, so it's worth checking out the General Assembly's website. And if you wanted to do more deep dive into the state code, those are worth looking at. How about, is everybody still awake?
Do we have
Three.
any questions?
I have a question, please, Sam, and Jared. Are we going to get into what happens, how things move from an NPU to wherever we are here. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, for matters on which the NPUs make a recommendation, I have some experience with the zoning matters. I staff the zoning committee. With each piece of legislation, there's a report about there's the staff report making their recommendation. We get the NPU's recommendation of for or against. When there's sometimes legislation will touch all the NPUs, and there'll be a voting sheet that shows how each NPU voted on a particular matter. And then those are recommendations that the council takes into consideration, but the NPU recommendations aren't binding.
That answers my question. Thank you, Jared.
Sure.
Mr. Martin?
Yeah, I've seen before on committee agendas where there is what appears to be sort of placeholder legislation, a title and no content. And I'm curious as to why that happens and whether a piece of legislation can get past first read without there actually being anything to read.
Well, I'm not familiar with there ever being no content. There are oftentimes be blank spaces for maybe specific names if it's going to name someone, or where the accounts for the funding haven't been identified, or sometimes haven't been created just yet to receive and expend funds. I mean, at the very least, it's going to have a caption explaining what the purpose of it is. Since you're drafting legislation, you're going to know some of the whereas clauses, because you're going to know your whys for needing the legislation. And then it may be the binding clauses that aren't completely fleshed out just yet, but you need to get that piece of paper in as a vehicle, because there's a due date that's pertinent that you want to, you need to get it in the process, and that you'll have the opportunity within the committee to substitute or amend to fill in those blanks.
Do we have any other questions?
I have a question.
Okay, Maria, go right ahead.
Will we be getting the presentation and the recording? I'm just kidding. I got it. We'll get it.
But there are people asking. We will send this. Actually, you all are going to receive an email at the end of the course with an evaluation, as well as a link to the YouTube channel, as well as a copy of the PDF, which will have all of the links that were available in the presentation. You'll have them on hand.
Well, and if you go to the website and get familiar with it, my email is there. I don't think I've put it in the presentation, but I could put it in the chat. So if there's follow-up questions, more specific, in nature, or you're just shy, I'm happy to try to explain or help you, probably connect you with the right resource, because I may not necessarily know the answer myself, but we can probably track it down for you.
So this will be the last call. Jared, I told you. Oh no, all right. Melody Ford.
I forgot what Jared said. Is a post at large District 1?
There is one post at large District 1. There's post at large District 2 and District 3. There are 3, and they.
No, I reside in District 1. So would I have Julian? Wasn't that Michael Julian Bond?
Yeah, post 1 is paired with 1, 2, 3, and 4.
That's my question. Yeah, thank you.
So I told Jared a sign of a good instructor and someone that delivers the message really well is that there aren't a lot of questions, and we actually breeze through the course. And no exception, I believe that happened tonight. I'm gonna pull up another screen. Jared, do you have any closing words you would like to say to the group?
No, thank you to NPU University people, and you guys do great, and I appreciate coming back. And I take the classes myself, so I like everything that you guys are doing.
Everyone bear with me because I am really multitasking right now. So give me 1 second. I'm gonna pull up the final screen. No one leave yet. We're not done. So thank you all so much for participating in NP University tonight. We have upcoming courses and events that you can look forward to. I actually don't have the events listed. But as you know, the kids are out on spring break, so we are doing our young adults or young leaders course, which starts next week, and that's civic responsibility for young leaders. We will have up to 30 rising juniors and seniors next week learning about this exact same thing, the civic participation, the legislative process. And they're going to have a mock city council meeting on next Friday when they are done with everything on next week. We have a new class that I would love for you all to go to npuatlanta.org and register for, and that is our ATL-DOT Vision Zero, Building Community Champions for Safe Streets. We are partnering with ATL-DOT for this course. It is brand new. I suggest everyone go and sign up. It's on Thursday, June 13th from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. on Zoom. And you can see the rest of our courses, which those two are actually in-person neighborhood empowerment workshop. That's Saturday, June 15th from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. in person, as well as the Urban Plan Academy, which is Saturday, June 22nd from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And those are limited seatings for both of those. And following that course, we'll have our parliamentary procedures to managing discussions around hot topics, which is for anyone who has to lead meetings, trying to get through meetings in a timely manner. This class is for you. I want to thank everyone for participating tonight in NPU University. And to find out all things related to NPU Neighborhood Planning Units, follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, X, whatever the kids are calling it these days, Instagram, and TikTok at NPU Atlanta. You can also follow us on Nextdoor at City of Atlanta Neighborhood Planning Units. And you can follow our YouTube channel, which will also have all of our NPU University courses from the last 3 years under NPU Atlanta. If there are no more questions, comments, or concerns, I bid you all a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.